This morning, Washington, D.C. awoke with the story of yet another senseless act of gun violence here in our nation's capital. I'm a former Senate staffer. Many of the people here at the Center for American Progress are former congressional aides. And today, a member of that community, a member of those public servants who go to Capitol Hill every day, our Capitol Police, our first responders, were the latest victims of an attack of gun violence in this nation. Today on Thinking Cap, we're going to get into that. I'm Michelle Jawando.
I'm Igor Volsky, and welcome to this very special episode of Thinking Cap following a tragedy that, Michelle, is all too commonplace in our nation. In 2017, we've had close to 28,000 gun incidents. Just today, we know of 3 shootings that took place in America. And joining us today to discuss the shooting is Chelsea Parsons, the Vice President of Guns and Crime Policy here at the Center for American Progress. Chelsea, I was just waking up this morning and saw a tweet that Scalise, who's also in the leadership in the House Minority Whip, and so had a security detail around him at that baseball game as members were practicing for the annual
Congressional
baseball game, a tradition that they've been participating in for close to 100 years. And it appears that a gunman, a lone gunman, opened fire with a weapon that we don't yet know as of this recording, fired shots for what sounded like 10 minutes to the witnesses on the scene, and hit several staffers and Scalise himself. Chelsea, where were you when you heard this news? And as someone who works on this issue, how did you react to it?
Yeah, so this one, sadly, this is just a regular shooting, right?
Yeah.
We can't forget the fact that there are shootings like this every day in this country that impact communities. There are communities in this country where parents don't feel safe letting their kids go to baseball practice. And so, I think that while we learn more about what happened today and we learn more about this particular shooter and this particular incident, I think we also need to really make sure that we are continuing to keep a focus on the bigger picture of what gun violence looks like in this country and the fact that it is an urgent public health crisis that really has gone, if not unnoticed, at least unacted upon.
So, Chelsea, my former boss, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, is the co-captain of the women's congressional baseball team. And actually, their game is always the week after. And I remember working for the senator or the whole office. We get really engaged. We have sign-making parties, and the women raise money for young survivors of breast cancer. And so there's always a little bit of teasing and ribbing with the guys because they have theirs the week before, and they are Republicans versus Dem, and the women are actually, the team is completely bipartisan, and they play against the press. It's a good time to be on Capitol Hill because over the next 2 weeks, there's all of these moments where Republicans and Democrats, senators and congressional members, even the press, you're kind of around each other socially. And so it's a really special moment. And so for someone to pierce through that kind of bubble, I think in some ways, and think that this cocoon that we have kind of built for this moment, that gun violence wouldn't in some way affect them, I think is a stark reminder for everyone, and hopefully even these lawmakers, that this is an epidemic that touches everybody, no matter where you are.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that with the cocoon of safety that many of us feel like we exist in, and really that's luxury. That feeling is a luxury, and
this can't happen to me.
Exactly,
and this happens somewhere else.
And it's really not a universal feeling in this country. And so, I think that is what often makes an incident like this, a shooting, rise to a sustained national attention, which is that, oh, I can't believe it happened there. And unfortunately, we keep, I've been doing this work for 4 years. There are more and more places now that like, oh, we never thought it would happen here. Like a movie theater.
A movie theater.
At a barbecue, like all of these different these places that
elementary school,
exactly,
right?
that kind of and your church.
Chelsea, so two things happened for me when I saw this across my feed. The first, and it's the way that I feel every time that I see an incident where there's some shooting. My first pause is always, I pray that they're not black. And then now I'm like, please don't be Muslim or brown or even vaguely unambiguously not white.
Because then the conversation's not about the guns.
The conversation is never about it.
Have we even heard anybody report on the race of the shooter?
Never.
Right? I mean,
Never.
it had, right? Like we don't.
Well,
we don't say it was
get so well. So first off, it's like you see the last name and you're like, okay, that doesn't look like it's one of mine. And then you're like, oh, the picture comes out, and you honestly, if you're a black or brown person, you have a sigh of relief, and that's a horrible feeling. But it's like the way we talk about these issues when we're dealing with it, and quite frankly, with any lens other than whiteness, is very different with how we deal with this issue. And I think that that's one of the challenges in this conversation. It's like these issues about gun violence prevention and what communities are affected, those numbers, why you get to 90 people are murdered every day, a lot of times those are black and brown communities.
Right. Yeah.
But how do we talk about that in a way so that people care?
I mean, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that if the proponent, or if the people who carried out the most gun violence were black or brown people, we would have a completely different conversation about guns in this country. But as it stands now, the victims of gun violence are disproportionately black and brown people.
I mean, that's one of the things that gets so frustrating about this issue is that, when it's a Muslim shooter, it's immediately terrorism. When it is a black or brown shooter, it is immediately gang violence, right? And when it's a white shooter, it's, somebody who's troubled.
Mental health.
It's mental health, right? And so, we have these kind of dug in lanes where we put things in order to be able to say, maybe it's to get us back to our cocoon, right? It's to be able to say, okay, well, this was gang violence, so
right.
so okay, that won't impact me, so okay, I can move on with my life. And I think that this issue is just so deeply personal for so many people, and there are so many communities who really just feel left behind on so many things, but when it comes to this too, there are so many communities who feel so pained seeing an incident like this get this kind of attention and never seeing the experience of their own community get any kind of attention.
This is a moment of unity. We saw on the House floor both Speaker Ryan and Nancy Pelosi give really moving remarks about their colleague and, of course, gave great praise and thanks to the Capitol Police for being there, for stopping this shooter. And multiple people who were on the scene said if it hadn't been for them, many more people would have been injured, lives could have been lost. And the challenge, I'm sure, for you, Chelsea, doing this work is when is it appropriate to move from a conversation that honors and reveres the people who have been injured into one about what can we do to prevent this from happening in the future? It's a real balance.
I think we shouldn't torture ourselves with that question. I think that the time to talk about gun violence is now. I mean, we have 90 people in this country killed with guns every day. And I think that, we honor those whose lives are taken by guns through action, right? And that's one of the messages around the Pulse anniversary, which just happened earlier this week, is honor with action, right? And so I think that sentiment is a really important one. And so I totally agree that we should be respectful of what the victims are going through today in the immediate aftermath of this shooting. And I think that we should have a thoughtful and respectful conversation about gun violence in this country. But I also think we do the victims and survivors a disservice by saying now is not the time.
Yeah. See, to me, and I'm kind of, I think, bold on this, that we have a moment of unity a moment when we're finally talking about the gun violence epidemic. It's great to talk about it, but it means nothing if we take no action time and time and time again. We just say thoughts and prayers, but we don't act in a way that reduces gun violence in this country.
No, but people come to this issue in so many different ways. I don't know if there is a common language around solutions here.
I mean, I think that you're absolutely right, and that's the quote unquote gun debate in America is. I mean, is there another issue area that's as fraught with debate, right? I think with respect to today's incident, it's really important to distinguish between the presence of Capitol Police, who were certainly responsible for minimizing the tragedy today, and the notion that if we had more civilians carrying guns in more places, that would help ensure community safety. There's just a stark difference between highly trained police officers and less trained or not at all trained civilians carrying guns. But the other thing is, I think that this has been one of those areas where if you talk to folks in your community at like the neighborhood picnic, everybody kind of agrees that there's way too many. There's too many shootings. There's too many guns. There's too many shootings. And, I've had conversations with, I live in Virginia. I have conversations with, gun owners. And when you ask them, well, do you think there should be background checks? Well, of course. We have that already. Do you think we should let people carry guns in, movie theaters? Well, no, we shouldn't do that. That's crazy, right? And so when you actually have conversations one-on-one with real people, it's a much more civil and much more productive conversation.
So let's go through some of these common sense policies or gun violence prevention policies for which there is broad support that could reduce gun violence in America. What are like the top 3 priorities you would have if you were advising members of Congress and we're telling them, don't let this moment of unity go to waste, do this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you hear, the top priority from folks who work on gun violence prevention for years has been universal background checks. It's requiring a background check for every gun sale. Right now, under federal law, only licensed gun dealers are required to conduct background checks, but private people can buy and sell guns without any kind of background check, without any kind of paperwork. So that's one. That's the proposal that has the broadest support. I mean, you see sometimes polls 90% of Americans support that, which is unheard of when it comes to public policy. With respect to what happened today and the other high-profile mass shootings that we've seen in this country recently, I think it's really time to talk about assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and rethinking and taking another look at the assault weapons ban that we had in this country for 10 years that was allowed to sunset, and really asking ourselves the question, do we want to live in a country where civilians have access to really highly dangerous weapons of war? Today, thankfully, the Capitol Police were there and were able to stop this shooter, but he was only able to inflict the kind of damage he was able to inflict because by the reports that we have seen so far, he had an assault rifle that had the capacity to shoot many rounds quite quickly. And so looking at assault weapons, I think, is really important. And the last thing, and Michele mentioned this before, is the link between domestic violence and gun violence. And this has been something that has been just demonstrated over and over again. But we know that when domestic abusers continue to have access to firearms, the risk that women will be murdered is just astronomical. And what we also know is that many of these mass shooting incidents have a root in domestic violence. And so many of these shooters first start at home and then end up going out and committing some of these acts. So those are a few things. I think what I would say is that there's not one solution. There's lots of things that we can do to strengthen gun laws, to invest in research so that we know more about gun violence. We haven't talked about suicide at all. 2/3 of gun deaths in this country are the result of suicide. And so, I have serious concerns about what the healthcare repeal would mean for efforts to reduce suicide in this country as well, and suicide prevention programs. There's a lot that we can do.
Yeah. Proving that we can both talk about policy solutions and keep the victims and first responders in our thoughts and prayers. Chelsea Parsons of the Center for American Progress, thank you so much for joining us on Thinking Cap. Thinking Cap is produced by Sally Tucker. Music by Kyle Epstein and Jacob Buchanan. Graphics by Matt Ingram. For more, find us at Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and at AmericanProgress.org, or wherever you want.